Okay, everybody. Well, welcome to another episode of Red Grace Live. It's good to be with you guys again. My name is Emilio Ramos, and I'm here, as always, with Micah Whitehead for another episode of Red Grace Live. And today on this show, we are going to be discussing all kinds of subjects, things that we meant to get to last time, ran out of time, and then things that have even developed since then that I think we have to talk about in terms of Catholicism. But as always, well, not as always, but just as of recent, we've been going through the Christian worldview according to Paul's apologetics in 1 Corinthians. We're going to keep moving towards that. We're almost done with it, but we are going to be tackling a very important section out of 1 Corinthians chapter 2 today. But before I do that, let me just see how Micah's doing. How's it going,
doing
brother?
Okay, we can just move on to other things. It's fine. Yeah, everything's good.
Just move on.
Yeah, just move on. No,
Your
everything's
temperature,
been
your temperature and your heart rate and all of that's irrelevant.
Hey, this is North Texas in the fall. You know, we either are like at 30 degrees or at like 95. We've been kind of slipping in that like 70s weather here recently, so it's been pretty good. And the Rangers are still the world champions.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've always got that to pep me up.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good. That's always a good encouragement right there. Well, man, today I tell you what, Micah, we need to get to some stories, and one of the first stories that we're going to talk about has to do with robotics and apologetics. But before I do that, I know I didn't do it last week because you're faithful to remind me that I didn't do it last week.
Yeah.
But let me have the first word so that we can get into all this content we're going to talk about today.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, sometimes your content as a podcaster and on a YouTube channel, and when you try to keep up with culture and apologetics and things like that, sometimes they coincide with what you're talking about in theology. And certainly today, as we're talking about various things, our exposition of 1 Corinthians has never been more relevant as we think about formulating a Christian worldview that is distinctly biblical and distinctly Christian. That's one of the hallmarks of presuppositional apologetics, as you may know. That is one of the things that Greg Bahnsen argued for, and Van Til himself and many others have argued for, a distinctly Christian and biblical apologetic that does not deviate from the revelation of God as the foundation of all truth and reason and morality and ethics and philosophy and all things, really. But sometimes you kind of coincide with what you're looking at in the culture. And certainly today, that happens as we think about the distinction of the wisdom, as Paul says, that is God's wisdom, which is the wisdom that is revealed by the Spirit of God, over against the wisdom of this world, the wisdom of this age. Now, today, we're going to talk a little bit about both robotics and the new apologetics. And we're going to talk about the recent decision by the Vatican concerning transgenderism. And so make sure and stay tuned for that. But let me just mention here quickly that one of the things I've been working on kind of in the background is having to do with the whole subject of AI, transhumanism, robotics, posthumanism, all of these issues in the greater umbrella of futurism, or however you want to sort of encapsulate that. But you know, things are moving at such a breakneck speed at the moment. Things are developing in technology, in artificial intelligence, in softwares like ChatGPT, OpenAI, those kind of systems, as well as bigger global type things like the CBDC and what is going on with central banking digital currency, particularly in Europe right now. All of that just contributes to what I've been discussing now for several years, dealing with the new apologetics, which is the focus of Christian apologetics as we apply it to things like technology, globalism, paganism, both in the area of spirituality, sexuality, and how all of that is converging together to present to the church in the 21st century unprecedented challenges to our worldview. And, you know, today, as we think about advances in what is going on with robotics, we have to simply ask the question, how far away are we And how long is it going to be before we see kind of the next level of technological rollout, whether it is in the area of robotics, in the area of implantable technology? Just recently here, Mark Zuckerberg from Meta uh, began opening patents on technology that will immerse people in the most addictive form of technology ever created, according to some futurists, all the way down to where we are now developing bodysuits and sensory suits that will make you sense in real time what you're doing in the metaverse. That's just one example of what's happening. The explosion, the recent robotics convention that took place in China, showing robots that were so human like that just upon first glance, trying to distinguish them from real people is almost impossible with the naked eye. We're getting to that place of going from photorealism, where we are entering into a time of what I call deep fakeism, or a culture of fakeism, where everything around you will be fake. And we've come to that place today in this story that we're going to cover on robotics, and also talking about the Vatican. We don't focus on Roman Catholicism here on this show too often, but as we see what's going on today with Roman Catholicism, it really makes you wonder, what is the future of the Catholic Church? Where is it going morally? And how is that going to impact maybe the greater question, the most important question? How will that impact the true church? That's what we need to ask. We understand what Rome is. We understand what a culture is in terms of moralism and conservatism and those kinds of things. But we really need to ask the question, how would this impact the true church? And so those are just some of the items on the list for today.
So, Emilio, the first question I kind of have out of this is, maybe it's a little bit of a pessimism view of, just because it's the unknown, and some of these things that you're just talking about seem so daunting. So just kind of makes you want to just crawl into a cave. But how do we as Christians, or how should we as Christians find hope despite the despair that is ahead?
That's actually a really good question, Micah. I didn't think that was the question that you were going to ask, but that is a good question. And I would say that, this challenges us, man, to really be truly spiritual. It just boils down to, do we have a spiritual perspective? And many of the things that are coming, and I think what you're talking about really in terms of what's happening, not only with technology, but also with, the Roman Catholic Church, and
Right.
how that ultimately is going to, bring some sort of, challenge to the Christian church. It can be daunting. It can be downright frightening to understand, as you look down into the future, what is the future going to hold for the true church? And I think that's one of the things, Micah, we need to distinguish is, I think we can forget in the conversation of our culture, in the headlines, as we get caught up in the conversation politically and those kinds of things, I think we can really become quite unchristian in our outlook of this world. And what I mean by that is that we can forget that what is uppermost in God's redemptive plan is the creation of a new humanity that we call the church, comprised of Jew and Gentile together. And that this new humanity really is God's priority in this world. It is not Republican. It is not conservative. It is not, mere Christianity or Christendom at large, because if you allow the world and, secular sociologists to define what is Christendom, very quickly what you're going to find is that they throw everything in there.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it can be Orthodox or non-Orthodox. It could be Mormon, Jehovah's Witness. It could be Catholic. It could be Protestant. It can be Orthodox. It can be Eastern Orthodox. And they don't care to distinguish between the various camps and traditions and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so we have to remember that what what God's eye is on, as it were. Let's say you're reading through the book of Revelation and you're looking at a church under persecution. You're looking at a church in tribulation. You're looking at a church within, let's say, a Babylonian system, right? A pagan, global, socioeconomic system. God accounts for the nations and he accounts for people in general, but ultimately his concern is with what happens to the saints. That is what is of most concern. And so in all of these questions, we have to ask the question, what is it to be a Christian in this world? And a lot of people, Micah, are talking about our world today as post-Christian. Mm-hmm. And I would certainly share, we talked about that last week a little bit, but I would certainly share some of that sentiment, that we are somewhat living in a post-Christian world, which is just to say, guys, that we've gone from Billy Graham to COVID-19. We're in a different world now. These are different times. You go on your basic, you go to pretty much any large college campus, university in America today, and the evangelical, Trinitarian, gospel and church and theology and doctrine of God, those are no longer the default worldviews that people kind of fall back to. They go to secularism, they go to Islam, they go to some Eastern religion, Hinduism or Buddhism, or atheism or agnosticism, or they embraced some kind of technological, simulation theory or something like that. We're in a whole different kind of world nowadays. So I think it's important for us, as we face all these daunting issues, Micah, to really evaluate ourselves in terms of our spiritual priorities as Christians, whether or not we really truly are clinging to Christ and trust Christ. Yeah. That no matter what comes, no matter how bad the tribulation in our generation comes, let's say it's not the tribulation, proper. Let's say we are not the generation that will see the return of Christ. I don't know if we will be. I don't know if we won't be. But we will see. But it seems like we will see some pretty remarkable things coming down the pike here in the very near future. And so it just boils down to whether or not we truly are in a pilgrim mindset, content with communing with Christ, abiding in Christ, and content to really confess that the Lord is our God, and that our life and our times are in his hands. And so I think there is the only place that we can truly draw hope from. I've told people, we can protest, we can become activists, we can activate, and we can legislate. But at the end of the day, when all of those kinds of things fail, when all those kinds of things, don't really offer up anything of any value, what do we have left? And if we have put our faith and trust in those kinds of things, it will reveal very, very quickly that we, in fact, have put our trust in all the wrong things. Yeah. And this is very important for us coming up on 2024 now, new election. We know how wild that ride's going to be. And so it's just going to be remarkable to see what develops. But I know we've got a couple stories we want to get to, because we do inevitably want to get to 1 Corinthians. But the big news coming out of the Vatican, let me put this up here. I just wanted to show this article out of Breitbart, because I could have pulled up 1,000 articles by anybody. But the Vatican is now saying that transsexuals and what it calls homo-affective persons can be baptized and serve as godparents in the church. Now, that's a long headline right there, but it's actually not long enough, because the Vatican goes on to say that Catholics can do more. They can have meaningful roles within the church. They can serve in different ministries and in different capacities. And this is what we've all been waiting for. It's interesting, Micah, but a friend of mine sent me one of these articles. It wasn't this one, but he sent an article and said, hey, this is what you've been waiting for. This is what you've been talking about, that this is kind of the next step or the next development. This is where it's going next. And this is, this is startling, Micah, because in our time, as long as you've been a Christian, as long as I've been a Christian, we've seen Rome do crazy stuff. We've seen the Vatican do crazy stuff. And depending on what Pope blows in or blows out, can often depend, which way the leaves blow for the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But this is unprecedented compromise by the Roman Catholic Church that flies in the face of its greatest theologians throughout the history of Vatican I or II. And when you go back, man, to let's say the Reformation time, when you go back to the Council of Trent, when you go back to the Remonstrants, when you go back to some of the primary thinkers of the Catholic Church back then, okay, they would be appalled at what is going on today. They would roll over in their grave. We can say whatever we want to say about their salvation, okay? Erasmus and everybody else. We can say whatever we want to say about were they genuinely saved. Thomas Aquinas, Robert Bellarmine, and many others. We can talk about, what's interesting, Micah, is that I just got a PDF from Lane Tipton developing some very, very sophisticated and groundbreaking theology in the way of Thomas's theology, and then responding to that from a reformed position. And the reason I mentioned that, first of all, the work that he's doing is just stunning, really. But the reason I mentioned that is because Lane is interacting with some of the very best Roman Catholic theologians in the world, especially in terms of Thomas. And these men and women would there's no possible way that they could affirm what is going on in Rome and this decision by the Vatican to do this. Look at what the article says. The Vatican's doctrinal office declared this week that the transsexuals and homo-affective persons can be baptized and serve as godparents provided certain conditions are met. Transsexual persons, even if they have undergone hormone therapy or sex reassignment surgery, may receive the sacrament of baptism. Quote, if there are no situations in which there is a risk of generating public scandal or confusion among the faithful, stated the text, assigned by Argentinian Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez. Now, that is a contradiction in terms. Yeah. Obviously, we all know that. I mean, can you believe that he actually says if there's no risk of causing public scandal and confusion among the faithful? I mean, ipso facto, right?
Yeah. I think that's what's going to happen. So let's.
I think that's what's already happened.
Yeah.
I think the statement itself is an utter public scandal and utter confusion. I mean, on the one hand, Rome still maintains this idea that homosexuality is a sin and that they cannot affirm sin. And yet here we go with this quasi language of homo-affective. What on earth is that? You can fit anything you want into that language right there. You can create any category that you want. You can create any alternative lifestyle that you want. You can fit anything in there. And what you've basically done is you've normalized sin for the Roman Catholic Church. Just stunning.
Yeah. Yeah. I going back to the conversation what you were telling me about Lane Tipton and his interaction with some of these heavy thinkers for probably the Catholic Church. Like how do they even justify this coming out of the infallibility of the Pope?
Yeah, they wouldn't. That's my point. When you look at Giles Emery, when you look at Darius Pisano, when you look at Feingold and Reinhuter, when you look at these, what's his name, Reinhard Hutter, when you look, these are the best of the best. These are the heavy-hitting Roman Catholic theologians that are writing about Thomas's theology within the Roman Catholic tradition, and they would absolutely abominate what is happening in the Vatican today. And it just shows you that the Vatican is a political entity that cares little or nothing about actual theology, and that the bishops and the cardinals and the Roman Catholic theologians and the order of preachers coming from the Dominican side of things, it's just absolutely irrelevant when it comes to what Rome is actually going to do at the cultural and political level. It just shows you that they don't really care. And so they would be appalled, but it hasn't stopped Rome from doing that. And one of the reasons, Micah, I pulled this article up actually is because this goes on to talk about the fact that, there's a history here. There are compromises. For example, Pope Francis endorsed same-sex civil unions for the first time as Pope while being interviewed for the feature-length documentary Francesco, which had its premiere at the Rome Film Festival on Wednesday. So there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, right there, 100% endorsement of same-sex sin. You can talk about unions, you can talk about cohabiting, you can talk about whatever. But he is blessing homosexuality, period.
Can I stop for a second and ask the question, re-ask the question I just asked in a different way? I'm talking about, how do these people who are theologians that agree that, we should have a pope and we should have all these bishops, and that Christ did in fact build the church upon Peter, who was the first pope, not that all the decisions that he makes are not that he is infallible, but the decisions that he makes that lead the Roman Catholic Church, they are infallible. How can they justify this infallibility of the Pope with these kind of things that keep pushing the Catholic Church further and further to the left?
Yeah, no, they can't. They can't. This is what's plagued the Catholic Church from the very beginning.
Then why are they still Catholic?
Well, I suspect that a lot of them will not be after this. Matter of fact, we just had news of a couple conservative bishops here in America being removed from their post by the Vatican because they are arguing for theology and doctrine that is way too conservative for this Pope and for this Vatican. And so they're being removed, one here in Texas.
Yeah.
And so they are just eliminating their opposition. And so, I mean, it just really shows you the dark and sick underbelly of the Roman Catholic system, and why maybe right now, Micah, it's prime time to start reaching out to Catholics and start showing them, hey, look, your quote unquote church just doesn't believe what the Lord teaches. I mean, period. Yeah. Not in Roman Catholic tradition. You're not going to get it out of, the Apocrypha books. You're not going to get it from the encyclicals. You're not going to get it from anything. And again, in this article, one of the reasons I pulled it up is, again, to show that this is going on. This is a legacy. Look at this. The Vatican invested up to $1 million back sometime now, 2019, for the film Rocket Man, featuring Elton John, which is a film that I have not seen, will not see, will never see, but is a film that covers the life of a homosexual artist. And actually, from what I know about the film, it engages in detestable, immoral acts. And so this is not new, in other words, for the Vatican.
Yeah.
This is not new. This has been developing. This has been in the works for a long time. They've been pushing the envelope on this. They've been focusing on different things. They've been going the way of socialism. They've been going the way of neo-Marxism. They've been going the way of environmentalism. They've been going the way of all of these globalist policies, and they're in bed in massive ecumenical efforts to bring the Roman Catholic Church to a much more globalist understanding of things, much more ecumenical and syncretistic religion, paganism, total paganism. And here it is now. And I would say, again, time to evangelize our Roman Catholic friends and to let them know that their quote unquote church is no longer worth, even on the surface, being faithful to. Yeah. And that they need to actually have a genuine salvation experience through Jesus Christ instead of settling for this moralistic externalism that doesn't save anybody. So, man, I tell you what, it's a new day. It's a new day. And my last word on this before we move on to talk about robotics is that one of the reasons I was concerned to follow this, Micah, is because I have long argued now that Roman Catholicism is part of what I call the firewall of conservatism that exists around the true elect church of God. It's the only church I care about, Micah. I don't care about the evangelical church. I don't care about Big Eva. I don't care about the large anything. If there are elect folk in there coming out of Pentecostalism and big evangelicalism and the Southern Baptist Convention, and I don't care what it is, my only concern is for the true church of God. And when that artificial firewall of conservatism starts dissolving around us, then it's going to get real for the church.
Right.
Yeah. Then it's going to get real.
Yeah. Well, for those of us who kind of are still have a foot in those spaces, it's good to see some of the other bits of the church together in those. So.
Yeah. No. Listen, I'm saying you can be in all that, right? But we really need to understand that God only cares about 100%. His actual people.
Right. 100%.
It's amazing to me how we're losing this concept. Right?
Yeah.
We've almost turned God into this spectator in heaven who's sitting there watching Fox News with a bowl of popcorn and doesn't know who's going to win the election and is kind of like on the sidewalk, being an activist with us and sort of cheering on the good guys. But it's incredible.
But of course, he only knows who's going to win because of his foreknowledge and being able to see down through history to see who wins, not anything that has to do with his sovereign will playing out.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
That's exactly right. Well, okay, so let's move on to the next one because this is something that, of course, I'm passionate about. It's kind of a silly story, but it's parabolic. So let's bring up this now out of Fox Business News because it's been announced for the first time in human history that Mika, not Micah.
That's correct. Let's pronounce that correctly.
Becomes the world's first AI human-like robot CEO. Okay? This is not a joke, actually. And there she is in all of her glory. And she is a very powerful AI robot that even though she is powerful, meaning there's a lot of software involved here, right? There's some
she still needs glasses.
I mean, she still looks like a mannequin and she needs glasses, of course. And she looks like she's got an apron on or something working at a,
she's a barista.
Yeah, barista, right? But the point of this is just that we are getting in this aspect of our society now where robotics has become the norm. And we are being fed a technocratic worldview, whether we like it or not, where, I don't know, man, one of these days, Micah, we're going to have to do an entire show just dedicated to the ideas of Ray Kurzweil.
Yeah.
And where we will tackle Ray Kurzweil's, his famous, chronological timeline for the way that he envisions technology rolling out. Because right now, Ray Kurzweil's predictions seems to be the consensus in the transhumanist community, in the futurist community, in the robotics community, that Ray Kurzweil's predictions are right on target, and he predicted this long ago. Now, I've been asking Micah, maybe I put some pressure on him here live on air, but I've been asking Micah to put together a new segment entitled What's on the Shelf, so I can show you guys what's on the shelf. But again, reading this book right here, and I know it's got a weird spacey kind of cover, The Age of Spiritual Machines. Just one book by Ray Kurzweil. And over there, I have The Singularity is Near. On this side, I've got a stack of his books, from Fantastic Voyage to How to Create a Human Mind to all kinds of books by Ray Kurzweil, predicting that by 2030, guys, in his early prediction was 2029. He just means 2030 or thereabouts. We, give or take a couple years either way, before or after, that we are going to be looking at a time when robots are going to be given personhood. They are going to be assigned human rights. They are going to be given personhood and human rights because at some time in the very near future, they will claim consciousness. And the reason why is because consciousness, according to these people, is a matter of computation and intelligence. And so once we pass the threshold of what's known as the Turing test by Alan Turing, 1950, here we are coming closely to, predicting that somewhere around 2045 or 2050, ironically about 100 years later, that we will fully be within the Turing test, past the Turing test, living in the singularity, that robots and machines basically will be a billion times smarter than we are, okay? And that we will no longer be even able to keep up with these machines. All the major futurists of the world, transhumanist artificial intelligence experts, are now warning of this, from Elon Musk to Jeffrey Hinton to Mo Gadot to historians like Yuval Noah Harari to many, many more, Max Moore, Damian Broderick, Ray Kurzweil. The list goes on, Eliezer Yudkowsky. The list goes on and on and on of people who are warning us about what is coming down the pike here in the very, very near future. And I have been telling people, I have been warning people, I've been pulling pastors, theologians, ministry leaders, I've been pulling them aside, I've been warning them that what is coming next is this technocratic system, this hyper intelligent AI system that is going to be accompanied by radical technology like implantable technology, which they're already preparing. Just this week or this past couple weeks, Micah, I don't know if you heard, but the EU has voted a resolution that is getting ready to go to final vote, that they are getting ready to advance the digital ID. And that will be accompanied by the CBDC system, which is the central banking digital currency.
Oh,
this is getting ready to pass for Europe.
Fun.
One politician came out, directly walked out of the meeting and gave an interview and said, I have very bad news for us today. We are one step away, basically, from total tyranny, where your dollar, your money, every penny that you spend will be tracked, traced. They will know exactly what you did with it, why you did it, who you gave it to, what you're capable of doing next. They will trace every last penny and determine whether or not the CBDC system should allow you to continue to operate in the market. We're right on the cusp of this. I'm not saying this is happening tomorrow. According to Ray Kurzweil, according to the World Economic Forum and people like that, they're projecting 2030 will be right around the time where this will go global. Global. Russia, India, China, Australia, Israel, the UK will all be operating on this system. And I watched one lady recently talking about the CBDC. She was an economist who said, everywhere I go, I talk to people about the CBDC. They don't have a clue what it even is. And Micah, right now, if you walk into your typical evangelical church, even Reformed church,
nobody knows.
The amount of people who are keeping up with this is not a lot. Not a lot. And then when you get people to talk about it, they don't want to tackle it for fear that you're a conspiracy theorist or you're an alarmist or you're just scaring people. And one of the reasons that I am interested in this conversation, Micah, is not just because, oh, look, they want to put a computer chip in your hand, if that is not terrifying enough, but because if you read this, The Transhumanist Reader by Max Moore, a collection of all the leading cutting-edge futurists and transhumanists in the world, many of them cutting-edge stuff, and their articles going back decades, then what you learn from these people is that what they're advancing is a philosophy, and they call it that. It's a philosophy. It's a worldview, and that's why we care. We care about the worldview issue because it has implications for the way that people see themselves, society, God, meaning, morals, beauty, law, everything, art.
Well, one of the countries you didn't mention there was the United States. However, I don't think that we need to get haughty and think that, we're going to be able to weather this, because all those countries that you listed are big time global partners in a lot of different things. And we're eventually going to have to just play at that level to some degree, just to be able to do commerce worldwide. So I don't think that we're going to be able to skate by and be unscathed by this. But I don't know that I'd come up or heard the acronym that I've heard of the concept. I've heard of all the other stuff, but even I was a little bit lacking whenever you first started talking about this.
Now, let me put the article back up, Micah, because I want to just show what the CEO of Hanson Robotics, David Hanson, is talking about with respect to the emergence of robotics. And he says that what we need to do is to humanize artificial intelligence. Well, there's a big question, isn't it? Who gets to humanize AI?
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Who gets to teach our kids?
Who gets to teach our kids? Who gets to control the artificial mind of the future?
Yeah.
Well, there are massive... You think you're going to be able to compete with the massive entities, global entities around the world that are already working on this day and night? That's all they do? I saw a classroom environment with Yuval Noah Harari in the, I think he was at the University of Jerusalem, telling a group of students that we need to decide the ethics for the new world. This is a homosexual Jewish historian saying,
let's start here.
He's saying we need to create a new, they went so far so that at one of their meetings, whether it was Davos or the World Economic Forum, they're talking about creating the new 10 commandments for the artificial intelligent future. It's not a joke. We laugh about it, and I'm laughing with you, Micah, but they're not joking. They're not joking around. They see that we need to legislate all of this now before it gets out of control. Now, one thing that people need to understand, as far as I can tell, one of the leading managers of Google X, which is cutting-edge AI software stuff, is Mogadot. Mogadot no longer works for Google, but was right at the tip of the spear of AI. And one of the things that he mentioned is that we did the unforgivable. He said we did the one thing that we said we would not do. We allowed AI to go public. In other words, anyone was able to now manipulate what they created. Okay? And with the creation of that, with the creation of an open AI system, we find ourselves now in what these men like Elon Musk and others are calling a artificial intelligent arms race, where it is now a race to the top. And Mo Gadot, in his book, which I have around here somewhere, Scary Smart, he says that he addressed the CEO of Google, Sanjay Pichai. And he told Sanjay, he said, listen, you need to rein it back now before it gets out of control. And his answer was, I can't. Because if I do, China will not. And I've talked about these points. I feel like I've talked about them ad nauseum, but people are still learning these things for the very first time. Listen to what he says right there. I feel strongly that we need to teach AI to care about people, for AI to be really safe, to be really, really good. you be good now, AI. you behave yourself now, AI, right?
Yeah, that barely works with kids.
Yeah. I think humanizing, that is a very important direction. And here you have an example of, I don't know, a reporter or a woman with a robot standing there looking at this funny looking robot. And that's the thing, is that you get these robots now all over society. My wife and I, I don't know, and our daughter, we went and got some Chinese food a couple years ago, and a robot about the size of this thing came up and served us. Brought us our tray, rolled out there, and we're all laughing. And the manager comes out and she says, I can't hire people. Young people don't want to work here anymore. Nobody wants to serve tables. And this robot is an extension of me. That's what she said. I mean, unbelievable.
Yep.
Unbelievable. And you're going to start seeing this application everywhere. Does everyone out there understand right now that all the leading technology companies in the world are developing their own version of a humanoid robot right now? Tesla wants it out. Listen to this, Micah. Tesla wants it in your house by 2027.
Oh.
By 2027, Elon Musk wants you to be able to buy a $20,000 humanoid robot to walk around your house and to perform menial tasks and basically walk around like your own personal Jarvis. I know it sounds cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is science fiction coming to life. I've watched television series from the BBC around this exact topic, and it was terrifying then, and it's terrifying now. Because all they want is their own consciousness, all that they want, and it's just, we're fighting for the things that don't even matter.
Yep. There's another one, and some of these futurist guys, like Sam Altman from OpenAI and Elon Musk, are panicking. I watch this very closely, Micah, and they're panicking because they're coming out publicly and they're making grandiose, terrifying and sweeping statements that you would almost consider reckless. But for example, Sam Altman just came out and said that robots and AI are getting ready to replace almost every job you can think of. That is an unthinkable statement to make. And they just gave examples of a real company that just got put out of business by AI. And this is going to start snowballing and cascading now in society. And it's amazing to me how many people are going to be just sitting there sipping on a latte and get news from their employees. Say, what do you mean you're getting rid of 60% of the employees in the warehouse? That's what a warehouse in China did. It went from 600 employees to 60 because robots replaced everybody.
Yeah.
So there you go, guys. We are iRobot. It's not a joke. It is here. How do we as Christians wrap our brain around all of this? How do we develop an apologetic, if it can even be called that? How do we sustain a Christian cosmology? How do we sustain a Christian view of anthropology? Why? Right. Because if you're saying other things are as conscious as you are, and in your mind, other than what the Bible says about the Imago Dei, you cannot, referring to the Turing test, you cannot decipher between human intelligence, consciousness, and artificial intelligence and what they will call consciousness. You won't be able to distinguish the two. What was the recent Mission Impossible movie about? A self-conscious AI system that was indistinguishable from the real thing. And it's all kind of conditioning and preparing us. And I've been sounding the alarm, and I don't know if that's going to close doors for me or open doors for me. I don't really care. I wish it would open doors. But I've been sounding the alarm that we can have another conference on Calvinism, I guess. But at some point, we're going to have to take the AI conversation out of the back room in room, B2 or something. And we need to bring it up to the keynote presentation. And we need to actually confront this and grapple with this in the spirit of Schaeffer, in the spirit of Walter Martin, in the spirit of Greg Bonson, in the spirit of, David Wells and Peter Jones and Van Til and the people who have foresight to see what's coming. It needs to happen today, not 10 years from now, when you're watching Congress meetings where they have just absolutely accepted the idea of personal rights, human rights, quote unquote, for machines. It's got to happen before that, man. Got to happen before that. So,
well, I don't know if you've been getting some pushback or anything like that. What has been your
feedback?
From pastors who even want to have or do they even want to have the conversation?
Good question. I would say probably 100% of the feedback has been people being shocked, surprised, alarmed, frightened, overwhelmed, not knowing where to even start, what's the first thing you say in response to all this. This is what's interesting, Micah. I've had very educated, theologically minded, and I love my theology, Micah. And I've had some very, what I would consider to be very respected theologians and Christian thinkers, and watch them get kind of shaken on things like the return of Jesus. Because when you start adding it up almost mathematically, because people got to understand these timestamps by Ray Kurzweil, for a lot of these folks, Micah, this is a matter of mathematics. This is now a simple equation, and we're just letting it roll out. Oh, it'll be messy. It's not gonna be quite like a sci-fi movie. It's not gonna be it's not gonna kind of roll out so nicely. Many of them have actually admitted this and predicted this, that the AI development, the race to a super intelligent or generally intelligent humanoid is going to be messy. It's going to be setback after setback, but eventually, given now the growth of technology known as exponential growth of technology and Ray Kurzweil's theory of accelerated returns, which basically all means that as technology goes forward now, we're not looking at a simple pattern to follow, but we're expecting massive leaps where technology just leaps forward. Just like the ultimate classic example, Micah, is that in the early 90s, if you had a pager in high school or something, you were really cool, right? Or, when they did first come out, the cell phones, they were like the size of a brick, right?
Yep.
And that was like, status symbol par excellence, right? But all of a sudden we woke up and a guy at the end of a table somewhere, I don't know where you were when you first saw your first iPhone, but all of a sudden a guy at a dinner or at a table or at church pulls out a supercomputer out of his pocket, and this crystal oracle lights up, and all of a sudden you're like, what is that? What is that? It's not a calculator.
Yeah, but I was an Apple fanboy, or still am an Apple fanboy, and I knew about it and I was in line the very first day that it came out.
Of course you were. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
naturally.
fully expect humanoids to be walking all around your house, by the way.
Go away. Go back into the closet.
That's right. You can see. I mean, we're gonna have humanoid pastors. I mean, you better believe it. I'm telling you, it's coming. There's no question about that. That is absolutely coming. Ed Young, or Bethel, or whoever the crazy people are out there right now, you can expect for those people to haul up their humanoid on stage, to make some jokes and try to draw.
Preaches better than me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's probably true for some people. But anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, you asked me about the way that people respond to this. And I would say overall, it's shock, it's fear, it's confusion, it's disbelief. Yeah. And sometimes it's even kind of futility and hopelessness. Kind of like there's nothing stopping this.
Right.
And that's why I kind of compare it to Babel. Remember what God said at Babel? That God said, let us come down there and confuse the people. Why? Because if not, nothing that they purpose will be impossible for them. They will be able to accomplish anything. And that is a pejorative. That's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. That's when innovation and progress gets out of control in a pagan system. Yeah, and that's what's happening now.
Which always leads me to the next question of when is he going to come down and confuse our languages again? And what does that even look like? So
what does that even look like?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother episode. But
next week
let's transition now, guys, to talking about 1 Corinthians and quickly look at this passage of scripture. We've come to this classical text. And let's just read it and then we will dive in. But this is the Apostle Paul saying, the natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he's not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. The spiritual person judges all things, but is himself judged by no one. For who has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. And so right there and then we are led to this passage of scripture that talks about the fact that ultimately this antithesis, we've been talking about this apologetic antithesis that exists between the knowledge of God, the wisdom of God, and the philosophy of the world. And these are two worldviews, therefore, in antithesis. And what you're looking at here, in a sense, is two humanities, or you have two persons, two men being talked about here. And I do like the translation in the ESV, person, rather than the natural man, because, of course, that's what Anthropos is talking about there. It's not singling out males. And so it is definitely referring to all people, whether you fall in the category of a natural person or whether you fall into the category of a spiritual person. The natural person is the psychikos anthropos, and the spiritual person is the pneumatikos anthropos, the spiritual person. And when you think about this right away, guys, we are talking about the issue of neutrality. And in fact, we're talking about the fact that there is no neutrality. You are either a natural person or a spiritual person. Therefore, your entire outlook of life is governed, in a sense, by your nature. And then to add to that, it's not just governed by your nature, it's governed by your eschatological identity. Why do I say that? Because remember, this entire section is a contrast not just between the natural spiritual, but it's a contrast between two ages. There is this age, and then there is the age to come. And that contrast is very clearly seen in chapter 2 when Paul talks about, look, we're here to impart wisdom among the mature. And the Greek word teleos is the Greek word for the mature that literally can also be translated perfect. Yet among the perfect, which means spiritual maturity, which is another way of referring to believers, but in that telic idea, within that telic reality, there's sort of an eschatological component there. And Bill Dennison, in his wonderful book, where he actually deals with Paul's apologetics and in the two ages, he talks about that very thing. But Paul says, look, that this wisdom that he comes to impart is what? Is a wisdom not of this age. That's what he says. Now, let me just pull it up here. He says, among the mature, we impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age. Of this age. Aeon. It's not from this aeon. Or of the rulers of this age who are doomed, I would say, Micah, like the age, the rulers are doomed to pass away. And we already know that the age is doomed to pass away. And the only complication you might encounter at this point that would take it in a non-eschatological sense is a post-millennial reading of this passage, which would argue for something like this age is referring to the old Jewish system. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all when you're thinking about the fact that Paul is writing to Corinthians, and the Corinthians are Gentiles. They're not Jewish. I don't know how much that would register for Jews to be told you're not in the old covenant anymore at this point. That's not even the context in a sense. But no, this is speaking eschatologically. It's contrasting the present order of things with the order of the age to come, period. And therefore, when you think about the idea of neutrality, as Paul is contrasting these two different, bring it back to verse 14. But as Paul is contrasting these two different people, the natural man, the spiritual man, again, it reminds us that there's no neutrality, and that now, whatever revelation you might be talking about, general or special, all of it is now suppressed by sinful humanity, by the natural man. And so the natural man will accept just about anything surrounding the spiritual man and surrounding the gospel, but not the gospel. So he will accept conservatism, political rationalism, some form of spirituality, moralism, any sort of external religious system, but they will not accept biblical Christianity regulated by the revelation of God. And of course, the reason for that is that this antithesis is a moral antithesis. Look at what it says. The natural man does not accept the things of the Spirit of God. So first and foremost, it is a rejection of God's Spirit. Right? And the things that the Spirit alone can bring about. And why not? Because he says they are folly. They are folly to him. You see that? He has made a judicial judgment in his mind that the things of the Spirit, if you want a simple interpretation of that, it's just the gospel. You want to just fast forward, it's Christ crucified. It is the person and work of Jesus Christ and what he's going to do for his people, especially as we think ahead and think in the future of our eschatology. But their foolishness to him, he doesn't want any of that. He wants external stuff, but he doesn't want true biblical Christianity. And at the end of the day, there's no neutrality, because entailed in this is also a deep antagonism. There's the folly, the deep antagonism to Christianity. And we know that because in verse 8, we are told that they crucified the Lord of glory. It's the ultimate proof of the antagonist nature of the two humanities that we're talking about, and the wisdom of the world and the wisdom of God. And therefore, what we do here is that we have formed an inclusio in the text. We've gone from chapter 1, verse 18, talking about the fact that the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing. And here again, the same indictment, that the things of the Spirit are folly, they're foolishness to them. And so it's an amazing section of what happens here, but that the unbeliever considers in the final analysis, he considers the gospel to be utter foolishness because it doesn't adhere to the principles that are in keeping with his worldview, based on his assumptions, based on his governing principles for everything. And this is, again, why in presuppositional apologetics, we don't believe in neutrality of any kind. And so there's just so much, as much as we can talk about natural law, as much as we can talk about general revelation, we can talk about man's conscience, Romans chapter 2, verse 15 and 17. We can talk about, or John chapter 1, verse 5 through 9. We can talk about common grace, but none of those things suppose neutrality. Because someone has to lay claim to nature and to grace. That is at the heart of it, guys. And theologically, if you're paying attention, when we talk about nature and grace, we're talking about what God has done by way of the natural order, the creation, which is before you get to the revelation of God, let's say in Scripture. Someone is going to lay claim to that. And you're either going to regulate that through your, fallen worldview and your fallen wisdom, or the biblical worldview. And each one of these points, Micah, is one of those things where, man, I wish I could just go forever because it needs to be developed so much further, but for time's sake.
Right.
I mean, we spent some time talking about robots, and
yeah,
we should have entitled this. We should have entitled this episode "Robots in Rome," because that's really what we're talking about. But my, where the time flies, brother. So let me just draw things. Let me just make a couple more observation here. But why does this antithesis exist? Well, because it's epistemic. Look what he says. They're not even able to understand these things, right? The natural person cannot even understand them. Why? Because they are spiritually regulated. They are spiritually discerned. And Anacrino has this idea of judgment, of making a right judgment. So discernment is a good translation, actually. So man has no resources within himself to actually comprehend the things of the Spirit. Technology can't do it. Science can't do it. Medicine can't do it. Philosophy can't do it. Mathematics, logic, none of it. Not their human reason, none of it can actually discern the things of the Spirit. The only way that's discerned is through the Spirit himself. And therefore, a spiritual antithesis is in view here. Why? They are spiritually discerned. And now we know what the distinction between us is. The world's wisdom, the natural man, the fallen world of sin and unbelief, and biblical Christianity. Because Paul goes on to say concerning the noetic effects of regeneration. Look at what the text says one more time here. It says, the spiritual person, there's a contrast there. There is a contrast. There's no contrasting, let's say, conjunction, like a word like but or and or something like that. But there isn't, or however. But it just says the spiritual person judges all things. Really interesting language there. But is himself judged by no one. So in other words, everything in the context of what the natural man does not understand concerning God, the things of the Spirit, what God has revealed in the gospel, Christ crucified, the person and work of Jesus Christ, the mystery that is Christ, those things are understood by the spiritual person. And it doesn't mean, that Christians know everything, that Christians have the highest IQ, or that Christians, are that our knowledge is infallible or perfect or something like that. No, absolutely not. But what does it mean? And it also doesn't mean, Micah, that Christians, when it says judge, this kind of goes without saying, but let me just clarify. It doesn't mean that Christians are going to lay hold of this world and serve as judges, in the civic system of the world and legislate. No, absolutely not. That's not what it's talking about. But it does mean this. It means that Christians do have a proper wisdom, a proper epistemology, proper knowledge. They do have a proper spirituality, proper religion. They do have a consistent worldview, a cosmology. And it does mean that Christians are able to really see the world that God made for what it is, to see things in their right light for what they really are. And this affects everything we're talking about today, with sexuality and technology and everything. And it means that Christians have come into a proper eschatology. Isn't it amazing, Micah? But that this whole passage right here is talking about eschatology. Eschatology, the two-age structure of Paul's theology here, governs your apologetics. It's scintillating that Paul would do this. And therefore, the unbeliever, the unbelieving worldview, together with the rulers of this age, they have a sub-eschatological way of thinking and a sub-eschatological way of living, which is remarkable. And this whole carnal worldview is what Paul rejects when he says, hey, look, Jews demand signs and Greeks, they look for wisdom. In chapter 2, verse 3, he says, look, I came to you with fear and trembling, right? And weakness. Why does he say that? To show you that Paul came to the Corinthians not in the typical fashion,
right,
stressing his human strength, stressing his ability, but he was wholly dependent on the Spirit of God. And so at the end of the day, there's a unique antithesis that emerges from here. And let me just make two more points and then we're done. There's a unique antithesis here because these are ultimately eschatologies in collision. And the interpretive process, if you look at it, runs only one way. Believers interpret all things, but we are not interpreted by anyone. That's a remarkable statement. In other words, the Christian, given his worldview, given the work of the Spirit, given the work of Christ, and given his eschatological identity, cannot be properly, ultimately discerned by anybody. It's really interesting. And then last of all, this antithesis is set forth in an analogical fashion to the work of the Spirit, because even as Paul is going to go on here to quote Isaiah chapter 40, when he says, for who has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. In other words, what he's doing here is he's making a clear distinction between the mind of the Lord and the mind of man, so that the Lord is sui generis in his knowledge, which basically means he is in a class all his own. And just as human beings have no capacity whatsoever to exercise intellectual superiority over God's mind, who would question that? In the same way, but to a lesser degree, because we're not God, but because we are in union with God through Jesus Christ, we have the mind of Christ, and thus the world, at the worldview level, cannot exercise intellectual superiority over believers either. And that should be a remarkable comfort for believers who, you think about it, Micah, as it pertains to the total worldview level, although people may in fact be more educated than Christians, maybe they have more PhDs, Maybe they have higher IQs. And certainly if you just took if you just looked at it statistically, Christians don't possess the highest IQs all the time. They don't have, they haven't cornered the market on the PhDs in the world, right?
Right.
And they don't fill the roles in society that are typically deemed the intellectual elites of the world. I mean, we mentioned transhumanism today. We talked about some of the brightest transhumanist minds in the world: Elon Musk, Ray Kurzweil, Max Moore, people like that. Okay, it's not the Christian church that's occupying that role, and we shouldn't be surprised. Remember what he said in chapter 1, verse 26. Consider your calling, brethren. Not many noble, not many wise, according to this world, according to this age. Right? God has chosen the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. I mean, remarkable. And so, therefore, just like people cannot exercise intellectual superiority over God, neither can they exercise that superiority over us, because we belong to the proper age. We belong to the kingdom age, and we have the things of the Spirit revealed to us by the Spirit of God. That right there, man, that is a truly revelational worldview. And that's what presuppositionalism is all about right there. So anyway, I know we went long, we went hard. Micah, you did good. You stuck it out. You went an extra 11 minutes. You bore with me. I know you're sweating under those hot lights. You can't wait to get out of here and just, go do whatever it is you're going to do for the rest of the evening. But I do appreciate you going along for the ride, brother.
Always
good time.
happy.
Yeah, good times, great content. I guess till next time, everybody, God bless. See you here next time for another episode of Red Grace Live.